For over 1,000 years, a pattern has repeated itself. 3 dates, 3 places, 1 target. 3 forces, originating from different times and places, have converged on a single goal: the systematic destruction of Islamic civilization's heart. What you're about to see connects the dots. 1480. Moscow declares independence from Constantinople. The Third Rome rises before the Second Rome even falls. A 1,000-year war against Turkic peoples enters its final phase. 1744. Najd, Central Arabia. A preacher and a warlord shake hands. The Pact of Diriyah. What follows will erase 1,400 years of Islamic heritage. 1800s. Russian Empire. Islamic scholars receive training in Russian institutions. They return home with one mission: undermine the Ottoman Caliphate. Tell Muslims not to resist. 3 forces. Different centuries, different methods, all aimed at one target. Right now, Muslim scholars with millions of followers tell you to trust the empire that waged 504 wars against Muslims in 550 years. This isn't ancient history. This is today. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why Turkey stands as the last obstacle to a plan over 1,000 years in the making. Why 300 million Turkic Muslims scattered across Eurasia terrify every major power. And why certain Islamic scholars want you to surrender without a fight. The pattern is clear. The evidence is documented. The deception is complete, unless you see it. Now. The Prophet's companions asked him to bless the lands around Medina. He blessed Syria. He blessed Yemen. They asked about the east, the land called Najd. He refused. 3 times they asked. 3 times he warned. From there will emerge earthquakes, trials, and the horn of Satan. That land? Modern-day Riyadh, Central Arabia, Najd. 1744. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab meets Muhammad ibn Saud, the Pact of Diriyah, an alliance between a preacher and a warlord. 1801. They massacre Karbala, slaughter thousands of Shia Muslims at the shrine of Imam Hussein. 1806. They seize Mecca and Medina. The destruction begins. The Ottomans crush them in 1818. Execute the Saudi leader in Istanbul. The nightmare seems over. But like a plague, they return. 1925. King Ibn Saud grants permission. April 21st. A date of infamy, under the guise of preventing idolatry. We may never know their intent, but we know the date and the symbolism. On the Gregorian date of the Prophet's birth, they destroyed Islamic architectural memory. Jannat al-Baqi Cemetery, the resting place of the Prophet's family. His daughter Fatima, his wife Khadijah, his companions, the earliest Muslims, bulldozed. But that was just the beginning. The Prophet's birthplace, demolished, made public toilets, and now it's a library. His wife Khadijah's house, public toilets. His uncle Hamza's home, a hotel. Imam Abu Hanifa's house, destroyed. The house where the Prophet received revelation, gone. 5 of the 7 mosques built by the Prophet's family, erased. Out of 1,400 years of Islamic history in Mecca and Medina, only 20 structures remain. 20. 98% destroyed since 1985. 300 documented sites erased or scheduled for demolition. And Mecca today? A spiritual Las Vegas. Clock towers taller than Big Ben. Shopping malls. 5-star hotels. The Abraj al-Bayt complex alone cost $21 billion. Built on what? The ruins of an Ottoman fortress from 1781. They tell you this is development, accommodation for pilgrims. This is cultural genocide, systematic, deliberate, funded by petrodollars. The horn of Satan, rising from Najd, just as prophesied. But here's what they don't tell you. Wahhabism isn't religious reform. It's Arab cultural imperialism wearing a theological mask. Think about who benefits when you declare 1400 years of Islamic tradition corrupted innovation. When you say Turkish Sufism is shirk. When you claim Persian Islamic philosophy is deviant. When you dismiss Indonesian, Pakistani, African Islamic practices as impure. Who's left standing as the pure Muslims? Gulf Arabs, specifically Najdi Bedouins. Now every Muslim must dress like them, pray like them, build mosques like them, speak Arabic like them. Your ancestors' 800-year-old Islamic traditions condemned as bid'ah. Your local saints who brought Islam to your land? Grave worship. Your poetry, music, spiritual practices, forbidden innovation. And who controls the definition of real Islam? Saudi Arabia. Who controls the holy cities? Saudi Arabia. Who funds the madrasas teaching this version globally? Saudi petrodollars. $70 billion spent since the 1970s to replace traditional Islam worldwide. But here's the key. Why destroy Sufism specifically? Because Sufism was how Islam spread to non-Arabs. The Mongol Empire, the largest land empire in history. They converted to Islam. How? Sufi missionaries, with their symbolic wooden toy swords. The spiritual beauty convinced the conquerors. Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia. 270 million Muslims today. How? Sufi traders and teachers. Zero armies invaded. They came with poetry and wisdom. Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Central Asia, Anatolia. All converted through Sufism. Sufi orders created indigenous Islamic authorities, non-Arab sheikhs with more spiritual legitimacy than any Gulf scholar. Destroy Sufism, you destroy non-Arab Islamic leadership. You centralize all religious authority in Arab hands. The Ottoman Caliphate? Turkish, not Arab. Their legitimacy? Partly Sufi-based. Destroy that. And you've eliminated the greatest rival to Arab religious supremacy. This is why 300 Ottoman structures in Mecca and Medina had to go. Not because they encouraged shirk, because they represented Turkish Islamic authority. Every demolished building, every banned practice, every condemned tradition, Arab supremacism, disguised as purification. Want to know the secret to Islam's greatest expansion? It wasn't the sword, it was the heart. The Mongols, Genghis Khan's descendants. They had just conquered the entire Muslim world. Baghdad burned. The Abbasid Caliphate ended. Islam looked finished. Then something remarkable happened. The conquerors converted. Not through force. They were the conquerors. Through Sufi spiritual teachers who showed them Islam's beauty. The Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde, the Chagatai Khanate. All became Muslim. Southeast Asia. 270 million Muslims today in Indonesia and Malaysia. How many armies invaded? Zero. Sufi traders arrived with poetry, music, and spiritual wisdom. They adapted Islam to local cultures. They didn't demand Arab customs. They brought spiritual transformation. West Africa. The Tijaniya and Qadiriya Sufi orders. Millions converted peacefully. South Asia. Chishti and Suhrawardi orders built the Dargah tradition. The Mughals themselves were Sufi-influenced. Anatolia, Rumi, the Bektashi order, the Mevlevi whirling dervishes. They transformed Turkish tribes into the Ottoman Empire. Why does Sufism work where Salafism fails? Sufis lead with love. They offered spiritual experience, not just rules. They used beauty, poetry, music, architecture to open hearts. They welcomed people. They didn't condemn them. They built inclusive communities. They adapted to local cultures while maintaining Islamic essence. What does Salafi Wahhabism offer? Constant takfir, calling other Muslims disbelievers, hundreds of restrictions, fear of punishment, joyless rigidity, and the results? ISIS, Al-Qaeda, global extremism, hatred of Islam. Islam's reputation destroyed by the very people claiming to purify it. They eliminated Islam's most effective dawah tool and replaced it with something that repels people. The greatest missionary religion in history, crippled by those claiming to save it. May 29th, 1453. Mehmed the Conqueror enters Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia stands before him, Christendom's greatest church. What happens next reveals everything they won't teach you about Islamic civilization. First, understand what the Hagia Sophia was. Not just a church, the imperial coronation church of the Byzantine Empire. When sovereignty transfers, the coronation church transfers to the new ruler's religion. Standard imperial protocol. The Crusaders did exactly this when they conquered Constantinople in 1204. Converted it to a barn, a brothel, allegedly, then made it a Catholic cathedral. Nobody called that controversial. Mehmed had become the legitimate Roman emperor, Sultan Nehru. He followed proper protocol. But here's what they really don't want you to know. Mehmed preserved it. He could have demolished it, common practice for conquerors. Instead, he converted it to a mosque and saved it. Those Christian mosaics everyone talks about, Mehmed ordered them covered, not destroyed, preserved under plaster for 500 years. Now, the class dimension. From 537 CE, the Hagia Sophia bankrupted the Byzantine Empire to build. The tax burden fell on common people who were then forbidden from entering. A monument to imperial power, exclusive to elites. The masses who paid for it couldn't even see inside. Mehmed converts it to a mosque. Suddenly, anyone can enter. Rich, poor, doesn't matter. It's now for communal prayer. The people who built it with their taxes can finally use it. But here's the key. By 1453, the building was nearly 1,000 years old. Earthquake damage, centuries of deferred maintenance. The Byzantines were too broke to fix it. Weakened dome, cracking walls, structural problems. The Ottomans spent fortunes preserving it over 500 years. Sinan, the greatest Ottoman architect, conducted major renovations. Protected those Byzantine mosaics that everyone claims Muslims destroyed. Without Ottoman investment, Hagia Sophia would be ruins today. It survived because it became Islamic sacred space. 1935. Ataturk makes it a museum. What happened? Deterioration, lack of maintenance. 2020. Reconversion to mosque. What happened? Massive renovation investment. Buildings survive when they're used and loved. Hagia Sophia exists because Muslims preserved it for 500 years. Meet Sheikh Hossein, a scholar with a massive Muslim following who preaches something extraordinary. Muslims should ally with Russia. Against who? Against the Dajjalic West and their puppet Turkey. Once you examine what he actually advocates, you realize there is no logic or reason in what he says. Hossein claims Russia represents the true Romans of Islamic eschatology, that Putin's Russia is prophetically aligned to protect Christianity, that Muslims should support Russian geopolitical goals instead of Turkey. And here's the stunning part. He argues Hagia Sophia should be returned to Russia as its rightful owner. Let's be clear, Russia never owned Constantinople. The Byzantines weren't Russians. The Ottomans conquered it legitimately in 1453 and held it for 500 years. Russia spent centuries trying to conquer Istanbul from Muslims and failed. Now a Muslim scholar tells Muslims to voluntarily surrender it? But it gets darker. Look at the map. Russia has positioned itself around Europe. North, Belarus, Kaliningrad, southeast, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, heavy Russian influence. Eastern Mediterranean, Syria, Russian military bases, Russian naval facility at Tartus, Russian air base at Khmeimim, North Africa, Libya, Wagner Group mercenaries controlling key territories, Russian military presence expanding, Egypt, massive arms deals, Russian nuclear reactor being built, economic dependence growing. Russia is encircling the entire Mediterranean basin. Now look at Turkey. It's the only gap in Russia's encirclement. Turkey controls the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, Russia's access to warm water ports. Turkey blocks Russia from the Mediterranean. Turkey is NATO's southern anchor. If Russia controlled Turkey, complete Mediterranean access. The straits opened. Europe completely surrounded, NATO's southern flank eliminated, land bridge to the Middle East. And Hossein tells Muslims not to defend it? He's providing Islamic theological cover for Russian imperialism. Muslims should ally with Russia against Turkey. The Ottoman Caliphate was illegitimate. Turkey should give up territory for prophecy. This is a Muslim scholar advocating for Muslim surrender to a Christian imperial power that has waged over 500 wars against Muslims in 550 years. Either he doesn't know the history or he serves interests that aren't Muslim. Here's a connection that changes everything about Middle Eastern geopolitics. 1 million Russian-speaking Jews immigrated to Israel in the 1990s. Today, they're 15 to 20% of Israel's population. 15% of all eligible voters. But here's where it gets interesting: political power. Yisrael Beitenu, explicitly the Russian Immigrant Party, won 15 Knesset seats in 2009. Became the third largest party. Its leader, Avigdor Lieberman, Moldovan-born, hardcore right-winger. Likud adds 3 to 4 seats every election just from Russian-speaking support. The margin between ruling party and opposition? Russian speakers decide it. Many hold hardline positions on Palestinians, settlements, territorial compromise. But the real issue is intelligence. Israel has deep intelligence cooperation with the US and Five Eyes. Signals intelligence, cyber capabilities, human intelligence, heavily integrated. Israeli tech embedded in Western infrastructure. Now add this: Russian-speaking Israeli citizens with family ties still in Russia, working in Israeli tech, defense, and intelligence. Israeli firms with US government contracts. Legitimate intelligence sharing between Israel and US. Here's the structural vulnerability. A Russian-speaking Israeli with family in Russia works in tech or defense. The Israeli firm has US contracts. Information flows through normal Israel-US intelligence sharing channels, and Russia potentially accesses Western intelligence through people with legitimate clearances and dual loyalties. No traditional espionage needed. The architecture enables it structurally. Russia maintains deep ties with Israel through this demographic while simultaneously arming Iran, Israel's enemy, supporting Syria, Israel's enemy, positioning as a Muslim ally, targeting Turkey, a Muslim NATO member. Russia plays all sides, uses Israeli connections for Western intelligence, uses Muslim rhetoric for legitimacy, benefits from perpetual conflict. And Imran Hossein tells Muslims to ally with this power? Russia influences Israeli hardliners through demographic ties, arms Israel's enemies to maintain conflict, positions as Muslim friend while genociding Muslims for 1,000 years. Muslims who follow Hossein's advice ally with a power that plays them and their enemies simultaneously.